Very, very happy to have you here. Thank you so much for your interest in this session. And I wanted to let you know that the session is going to be recorded. So just so that you're aware. And I'm Isabeau Iqbal. I'm a senior educational developer at the Center for Teaching, Learning, and Technology. And I have been working with folks on their dossiers for probably over 20 years at this point. And kind of one of my biggest lessons is that folks don't know what's expected. And that creates a lot of stress. So part of my mission today is to reduce the stress, and I'll say a little bit more about that in just a few moments. I did want to say that I am joining you from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam. This is the beautiful double-headed serpent post that we have here at the east entrance of the Vancouver, the Point Grey campus. And I know we have folks joining us from different campuses, and welcome. I also want to share, like, as I was reading a little bit about the double-headed serpent, I found this, which sounds quite intriguing. And it is, I'm just going to put this in the chat. Let me make sure that I've got the right. So this is a Indigenous outdoor art series, and it's a map that takes us throughout the Point Grey campus with different stopping points and some stories. So I was thinking that that would be something that I would like to do, and offering it to you is something that you may want to do with a visitor or with on your own when you're wanting to get out of the office and into some space. So why are we doing this session? As I mentioned, there is a general lack of clarity from among faculty members around, like, what is expected when I'm putting together my dossier. And that does create a lot of stress. So I designed this session specifically for instructors at UBC who are developing their teaching dossiers as part of tenure, promotion, reappointment. And I know that we have a variety of folks here, and my hope is that it will be useful to you, regardless of where you are in your journey. Um, and the point of the session is to look at different ways that you can present evidence of your teaching effectiveness. And we're going to look at a lot of examples. I wanted to say that I do not sit on hiring committees. So that is not the perspective that I bring, but I bring the perspective of someone who has looked at a lot of dossiers, provided support kind of from my own perspective and vantage point about, like, what's clear, what's not clear, how might you make this more compelling, and I find myself, anyway, when I'm working on something, seeing examples is really, really helpful. And so that is what I want to do today, is share a number of examples that I'm hoping will kind of spark some ideas for you and give you some ways about how either you might revise or move forward on your dossier. And our agenda is pretty straightforward. I'm going to do a little bit of introduction to this piece, evidence of teaching effectiveness, which, as you know, this is what you need to demonstrate in your teaching dossier. And then we're going to spend a fair bit of time looking at examples. So feel free to be camera on, camera off. As I said, questions in the chat I may miss. Unmute at any point. If I think I'm showing something on my screen, but you're not seeing it, don't be polite. just tell me, hey, Isabeau, I can't see what you're showing. So, and please contribute to each other's questions and to the group wisdom here. All right, so what do we mean by effectiveness? Well, I found this quote, which I think summarizes it so beautifully, and I want to share this with you. And Audrey, if she hasn't already, will put the slides in the chat. They were also sent to everybody who had registered, but just in case you missed that, they'll come in the chat, and of course they'll be available to you. All right, so here is a quote. Faculty members are evaluated in a variety of ways to determine whether they should be promoted or rewarded and to potentially improve their performance. An appropriate measure of faculty members' research productivity that is often used is the number and quality of published scholarly papers and reports. No surprise there. A similar measure of teaching effectiveness is not readily available. Aside from the fact that there is no clear agreement on what an effective teacher is or does, or perhaps because of it, there is no universally accepted method for evaluating teacher effectiveness. So, on one hand, that creates confusion and uncertainty. And on the other hand, the good news is that you get to craft your story. And I think that is really hopeful, and that is very promising here. So, in terms of evaluation of teaching and sources of evidence, what is generally agreed upon is that there's three main sources of evidence. There's the students, there's yourself, and there's peers. And those are kind of the three main areas when we're looking at sources of evidence, when specifically around the evaluation of teaching. So what this looks like in your dossier for the students, often you'll see information about student experience of instruction results. And I did see the comment around, like, I want to go beyond that, definitely. There's mid-course feedback that's also commonly seen in a teaching dossier. In the peers section are the peer reviews of teaching. And then for the self piece is the narrative that you craft, that you create, and that you weave throughout the dossier. Evidence of teaching effectiveness can be demonstrated through so many other ways too. So here's a list: data on student outcomes, examples of student work, your course materials and syllabi, collaborations with colleagues, guest lectures, conference presentations, grants, solo research, the professional growth that you do in your teaching. So we're not limited to, like, the kind of the big three, the ones that the narrative is not optional. That is part of your dossier. But it's not just the student experience of instruction results and the peer reviews of teaching. There's so many other ways that you can demonstrate your effectiveness in teaching. And I'm going to show you on the next slide a chart that Dr. Jackie Dang created as part of one of his workshops on teaching effectiveness. And we're not going to look at it in detail, but I do want you to have it as a resource, and that's why I included it in the slides, because I think it's really, really nice. And he says, let's look at all these ways that we can demonstrate teaching effectiveness when we think about student learning, right? Because that's often a piece, is to demonstrate your impact on student learning, which is very challenging to do. And what I love about this is that he's got this grouping, right? Cognitive, behavioral, and then the relational. So it might be that you have created a real strong sense of belonging in your teaching. Well, that's a measure of teaching effectiveness. Perhaps you've really incorporated a lot of learning from peers. So this will be here. We're not going to spend time on it, but I wanted to really bring your attention to this as a way for us to expand how we think about demonstrating effectiveness in teaching. And then sort of more generally, what this might look like in your dossier: reflections. It could be summaries. You could present the information qualitatively or quantitatively, both, of course. Some people use quotes, tables, diagrams. So there's lots and lots of ways that you can think about making your case for your effectiveness. You are not limited to a certain way, which can be good, but can be overwhelming. I recognize that. Um, Very practically, just want to remind us all about the SAC guide. So please, please, please make sure to consult the SAC guide because they have a very they have it written out in terms of practical considerations and what counts as evidence of teaching effectiveness. So 5.2, Appendix 2, and then always talk to your head. If you have a new head, that can be tricky because they're still, figuring things out. If your head has been in their position for quite some time, then they may be able to provide more guidance. And of course, colleagues, like a lot of people will reach out to their colleagues to see if their colleague can either provide feedback or might be willing to share with them their teaching dossiers. So that is something that I always recommend to folks as well. So the examples that we're going to focus on today are the student experience of instruction, peer reviews of teaching, mid-course feedback, and teaching awards. We'll see if we have time to get there. And as I said, the main approach that I've taken for today is to show you examples and to talk through kind of some of what I think works. And of course, you're welcome to comment on that too. So the student experience of instruction surveys.
Before you go further, I think there's a
Yeah.
really good question in the chat that just came in. What's the expectation for how many hours in total it should take to prepare a dossier?
Um, the general guidance is start months in advance. So this is not always possible and not always what happens, but that is sort of best practice if you could start in terms of number of hours. I don't know. I think it varies so much from the people that I have worked with. And so give yourself time, Craig, to be able to revise, to be able to get someone else to read it. If anyone in the room has some thoughts on what worked for them as they prepared their dossier in the past, then please feel free either to unmute or put your own experience there in the chat. I'll just see if anybody wants to say anything about that to Craig's question around what's the expectation for hours. Yes, and that's the reality is that I can say and I I would really say give yourself time, and then the reality is that either because it's so overwhelming, people sometimes wait, um, but uh, but I wouldn't advise for that. Okay, so here with this student experience of instruction, I want to show you some examples, as I mentioned, and very generally, some of the ways that people share about student experience of instruction results is that they might put numbers in the main part of their dossier. They might not put the numbers and have more of a narrative and a reflection. Um, they might put the reports in the appendices, so not at all part of the main dossier. And a fourth way that I have seen is that the results are only available if the reader, the assessor, the evaluator asks the head. So they're not at all in the dossier. So there's varied ways that that shows up. So let's take a look at example from Dr. P in medicine here. So Dr. P has put a bit of a preamble that I cut off, but and then they have put their table here, which also I cut off. So Dr. P writes, the following tables provide data from student evaluations of my teaching effectiveness over the past 5 years. The UBC Faculty of Medicine does not provide comparative scores for other faculty members who teach in these team-based curricular lectures, labs, and tutorials. Data represents students' overall rating for the instructor was it effective teacher on a scale of 1 to 5. So a little bit of an explanation for someone who may not be from UBC, who doesn't quite know how how UBC organizes their surveys. And then kind of a very simple table that outlines over time sort of what their results were in that one question. So that is one way to do it. So they explain, they present the data. Okay, those of you who are more numbers people, I don't even know what this kind of graph is called, but this is another way of presenting your numbers. And this is from Dr. O in the Faculty of Science as UBC. And they have chosen to color code according to favorable, neutral, unfavorable, which is part of how you get your results from the institutional reports. However, just like with Dr. P, Dr. O has a preamble. So they write, the next figure shows, oops, I missed the S, shows the distribution of students' responses to the prompt. Overall, the instructor was an effective teacher. For each course, I have calculated the average of responses. The strongly agree, while the disagree and strongly disagree have been grouped. Sorry about the typos. I include this chart as evidence of effectiveness because it shows that most participants across all courses I have taught view my teaching practices as effective and helpful to their learning processes. So that sentence makes it very easy for the reader to get the gist, right? So they are very, very clearly saying that across all the courses I have taught, view my teaching practices as effective and helpful to their learning processes. So again, they had this prior to this chart here. So my point being that you want to make it easy for your reader to glean the important information. You don't want to just slap a whole bunch of numbers and tables without any reflection and interpretation. This example I wanted to show you because I think it really nicely brings together a few elements. This is Dr. Lisa Benyasad in the Faculty of Science, and she does a lot of reflection in her dossier. So she writes here, some of the weekly check-in results were echoed in student experience of instruction reports. For instance, we had actually afforded too much flexibility in our quiz submission deadlines. So I won't read the whole thing, but the point is that in her dossier, she's talking about the mid-course evaluations, which we'll talk about a little, we'll show you some examples later, but she's tying it to the student experience of instruction results, right? She's having these different parts speak to each other and showing her ability to reflect and really indicating, signaling to the reader that she is reflecting on her teaching, that she is using multiple means to gather evidence on her teaching effectiveness. So I thought that was really, really nice. All right. I'm going to now move to the peer reviews of teaching and show you a few examples. Okay, so peer reviews of teaching. Within UBC, you are likely familiar that we have formative reviews, meaning more focused on your growth and learning, summative reviews, which are typically required before you go up for reappointment. Or for tenure, and also for promotion later. And as part of that, the reflections on your experience. So we're going to look at a few examples again. Here, this is Dr. O, who we saw just previously. And they put this in a section that they have called Evidence of Teaching Effectiveness. So they write, since joining UBC, I've had two formative peer reviews of teaching on my formative peer reviews of teaching on my teaching. Sorry. The table below shows the review and the course in which each review occurred. Again, a simple table here, course name, the faculty who did the review, date, class size, and attendance on the day. Most of the comments were complimentary and highlighted my use of technology and pedagogy. My peers' feedback aligns with my teaching philosophy. The figure below includes snippets from their reviews. I have included quotes from the review for each of the 4 principles from my teaching philosophy. So I know you can't see the whole thing, but again, what this person is doing is they haven't just written their teaching philosophy and let it be. They are weaving their teaching philosophy into their narrative, in this case, bringing it together with the comments and feedback from the peer reviews of teaching. And they've done it in a fairly creative way where they've done a diagram. You don't need to go, you don't need to go to that extent. But we are seeing that the faculty member is pulling out the key bits of information as they build their case. Most of the comments were complimentary and highlighted my use of technology and pedagogy. But they don't just leave it there. They do have a more detailed diagram that follows this part. So this is one way that you can share about your peer reviews of teaching. Here we have Dr. Jonathan Barrett in engineering at UBC, and he writes, peer evaluations in teaching conducted by tenure faculty in each academic year I have taught can be found in appendix blah, blah, blah. These correspond to whatever courses. I will draw from these evaluations in describing the impact of changes I have made to courses as well as my reflections on the courses. And we're going to see a little bit more in just a moment. So he's signaling, where do you find the peer reviews of teaching? And I'm going to be bringing them in to the dossier. So he's not just leaving it alone, leaving it up to the reader to interpret, but he's going to draw from them. And he does that very explicitly. And his dossier is available in full. The link is at the bottom of this slide and worth looking at. All right, so I am going to just change my share screen and show you a little bit more here about from Jonathan's. All right, so this is the dossier, which you have access to, and I'm just going to make that a tiny bit bigger so that you can see. So what Jonathan has done here, sorry about this. So he's got a section called course instruction, and then he's got a subsection for each course that he teaches. And it has description, structure, and organization. Then he has a separate section, reflection on student evaluations. So he connects and he has a narrative portion there. And then he has a separate section, reflection on peer evaluations. So that is, I'm showing you this as another way that you might be able to bring these together.
Isabel, could you share the context for that dossier? So Connie's mentioned 200 plus pages. So not everybody will have a dossier that lengthy, but the context for this professor's.
This one here is when he went from assistant to associate. If that's the question, if that's what you meant by context. And correct, not everybody will have 216 pages. And in terms of the length, then that is often, it really varies by department. Some departments, they don't want to see more than 10 pages, not including the appendices. Others, 50 is very, very common. So yeah, this is where checking with your peers, checking with your head is helpful. Thanks, Megan, for bringing attention to that question. And thanks for the question. So let's take a look at how This is how another faculty member has chosen to include evidence from colleagues and peer feedback. This is Dr. Ng. This is an example taken from the University of Calgary. And we're not going to look at this, we're not going to read through it, but just to show you visually, can you see this? Am I sharing my screen? Yeah, okay, good. All right. Um, what we have here is that Dr. Ng has actually chosen to put some quotes from her co-instructor, from somebody else who's taught the course. I haven't read this in detail, but I did think it was an interesting way that you could consider putting some information. I don't see this very often, but I wanted to show that to you. And then similarly, Dr. Keegan's also from University of Calgary has a section on peer feedback, writes a little bit of a narrative, and then includes some quotes. So those are just some other ways, and those examples are on the slide in terms of where you can download that from. Okay, let me just start sharing my slides again. So here, those samples are available in full here.
There's a conversation starting in the chat, and I encourage folks, if you know the answer to questions, please share them. So Enda's asked, how are peer reviews typically scheduled, solicited? Are these usually assigned, or is it expected that we approach people to solicit? And Erica and Shannon have provided their experiences.
Thank you. Yes, excellent question. And without having read the responses, it for the summative reviews, there should be somebody in the department who has some sort of master spreadsheet indicating when those should be done and scheduled. However, I always encourage faculty to be proactive and to check in and make sure that things aren't missed, because people are busy and things are missed. And often peer reviews, it's like a little bit of a scramble at the end. So if you haven't had that conversation yet, then please check with whoever your peer review teaching lead is. And I may be repeating things that are already said. In terms of the formative, you can request those at your discretion when you want. Sometimes they are built into the departmental processes, and sometimes they aren't. So something to check as well. We also at CTLT have a fabulous team of over 20 people who are available to do confidential formative reviews. So if you have any questions about that, you're welcome to email me after the session. But that's a really nice way to get somebody from outside your department and discipline to come in and have a collegial conversation around teaching. Anything else? Thanks, Megan. Appreciate you.
And Connie has asked, as a TA, would it be fair / reasonable to ask a prof for some kind of review? And Natalie said, definitely.
Yes, and they may be too busy. They may not have the capacity to do it. So if you have a good relationship with somebody, you certainly can ask. You can also ask your peers, and that's great. And I encourage people to do reciprocal reviews, and because that levels the playing field, and it's a lovely way to learn. Yes, thanks, Natalie, for pointing to the graduate student peer review teaching program. All right, thank you. Super. All right, mid-course feedback. If this is something that you are not yet doing, highly encourage you to incorporate it into your teaching practice. And we do have a full website that's dedicated to mid-course feedback and gives you ideas on how you might want to do that. And again, I wanted to show you some examples. This one here is from Dr. Accurso in the Faculty of Education. And what I want to do instead of reading that is that I want to show you her dossier. Can you see that? Yes. Okay. So I want to show you this. Well, first I'll show you this part, which is around student feedback and the evaluation of teaching. And what Dr. Curso has done here is that she writes, student feedback is a critical element of effective pedagogy, and not just at the end of term or from students who feel compelled to complete formal course evaluations. Therefore, a key part of my practice is to establish class routines to hear from every student every week, in bold, in ways that scaffold their ability to learn deeply during the course and give meaningful summative feedback at the end of term. Most often, these routines include a combination of weekly individual free writes and written responses. So again, is that she is sharing her practices. She is demonstrating exactly how she collects mid-course feedback. So she's not just saying, I, collect feedback from my students throughout the term. She is tying it to her beliefs around good teaching, and doing that in a really concise way. What I also want to show you is something a little bit kind of a tangent, but this is Dr. Accurso's dossier. And so we see something really visual. Right? We've got little snippets here. I'm trying to make this smaller so you get a little bit more kind of this beautiful layout, a land acknowledgement here. And I'm showing this, and she's got some, some images, quotes, color. And I know this isn't necessarily directly linked to evidence of teaching effectiveness, but it's that most dossiers that I see don't include visual elements, and that's perfectly okay. But to say that if that's something that speaks to you and is part of who you are and how you teach, then you can include it. So yes, there's a certain kind of genre around teaching dossiers, but there's a lot of flexibility also. So that's why I wanted to show you that as an example. So that was Dr. Curso. And then back to Dr. Banyasad, who had done the weaving of the the kind of mid-course feedback and the student experience of instruction. So this is a section of her dossier where she speaks directly about the weekly check-in reflection. So for example, in this section, I describe work that involved reflection on my teaching practice using various assessment instruments. And then she goes on to write. In normal times, I would be able to sense from the body language and facial expressions of students in class, et cetera, how they were feeling about the course. In my course, we have students fill out weekly work reports. So again, remember, we're talking about mid-course feedback and how different faculty members have then brought this into their dossier to strengthen their case as effective teachers. We know that this, in terms of teaching practice, and is a really, really strong and important practice, is collecting feedback and getting feedback from your students on your teaching, and showing that you are a reflective practitioner. Right? So you are collecting, you're describing how, and then you're also reflecting on it and the impact on your teaching.
Anastasia's just commented that they thought dossiers at UBC needed to follow a somewhat rigid structure. So interesting to see examples with pictures and many visuals. And that goes back to your point, I think. It depends. on a lot of things.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It does depend on a lot of things. So there is no UBC template for dossiers, unlike the UBC CV, where there is a very well laid out template. For dossiers, there is no template. I did see one, oh, in the Faculty of Medicine. I can't even remember which department, and I don't know if it was optional or not. But really, you have a lot of autonomy in terms of how you craft this. Teaching awards. So that's another sort of section that people will include in terms of demonstrating their teaching effectiveness. And I recognize that, not all of us have awards on our teaching. And of course, if you do, or even if you have nominations, then you can include that. Right, so this is Dr. Carol Ng, and thankfully I wrote these various pages down. So she has a section, awards and recognition, and she writes a very simple paragraph. I received the Faculty of Social Work Undergraduate Teaching Excellence Award at the University of Calgary. The award is similar to, the university-wide award, what it meant to me, etc. So she has chosen not just to list it, but to tell a bit of a story about that award, and to link it to another award that the University of Calgary offers. Do I have Jen's available? Let me just see if this is, yes. So this is another example here. Let me just go to page 10. So here we see a dossier that's 26 pages as opposed to 216 pages. Sorry about the scrolling here. Okay, so in this case, and I'll just make that a little bit bigger. So there is a section, evidence of teaching effectiveness. And in this case, there's just a list. I was nominated for the Queen's University Alumni Award for Excellence in Teaching, 3-time recipient of Drama Department Award. So no story here, just a very simple presentation of a nomination and award. So that's another example. And then we have a third example that I'll just show you. So what we have, kind of going back to Dr. P in the Faculty of Medicine, though this is another faculty member, University of Calgary, they have presented their student experience of instruction results. And then kind of like tucked in here, I would say that if it were me, I would make it stand out a little bit more, because it might be easy to miss. I'm honored that my efforts in teaching have been recognized by my peers. In 2019, I was the recipient of the Workland School of Education Teaching Excellence Award. And so that's a choice, right? That this person has put it in their narrative, and it doesn't kind of stand out to me anyway. So, but I wanted to show that as a different example. Thoughts, questions, confusions, and any relevant stories that you might have from your own experiences in teaching, either evidence of teaching effectiveness or dossiers. Yeah, Shannon, please go ahead.
Well, thank you. I'd heard, I can't remember, I probably had another dossier workshop, to be cautious not to sort of like cherry pick positive comments from evaluations. And I mean, I guess I suppose the formal and summative peer reviews are a bit different because there's a formal process for that, but I'm just wondering what your thoughts
Yeah.
are about that, to not sort of cherry pick just the positive things and if that actually might be a negative.
Yes, definitely. I've heard
Okay.
that repeatedly. And that's why I was a bit surprised in those University of Calgary examples that they had those quotes. So I would say that if someone is a graduate student with not much not too much teaching experience or postdoctoral fellow, perhaps that could be okay. But I have definitely heard that for tenure promotion or reappointment, that is not advised. Yeah, thank you for your
Okay.
question.
So Connie's just checking back, advising on if you have negative comments or less than positive comments to include them or not.
In terms of, so what you don't want to do necessarily, or at least at UBC, it doesn't seem to be acceptable practice, is to select quotes, either positive, negative, um, and cherry pick those and put them in your dossier. However, I do think what's important is if you have had mixed comments on your teaching, as almost everybody has, is to show that you're reflecting on those. And so you might say, for example, that if there was a theme that kept coming up either in your mid-course feedback or that students have shared with you in other ways, that would be absolutely appropriate for you to put that. Or let's say your course, your student experience of instruction results have varied. Maybe they haven't been, a upward line. Then to reflect on that would be great in your dossier. Yeah, so we should include a balance for sure. Yeah, great. Okay, go ahead, Enda.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, it's just follow up on the formative peer review. And I guess if we're approaching colleagues to request formative peer reviews, should we be, would it be normal or expected to request sort of written feedback, or should we be just using it as an opportunity to sort of get informal, uh, you know, I guess verbal feedback on our teaching?
Yeah, thanks. Great question. For sure, writing things up will take your colleagues more time. And so again, it may depend. It might be something that you discuss together. Like, I'm really
Mhm.
keen to grow as a teacher. I would love it if you could come into my classroom and then we could meet and share some observations and some of your impressions. And perhaps and then I would recommend a conversation about whether you're hoping to have some written feedback or not. For sure, if you do that and they provide written feedback and it's something that you want to include in your dossier, you will need to ask for their permission to include it.
Mhm.
So that's usually what I recommend. I mean, I always think it's better to have something written because there's so much to process when you're then having what's called like that post observation conversation. And so having something written is helpful. But I guess it depends on how formal you want it to be.
Gotcha. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you for your
Very much.
question. All right, so thank you for that. And in terms of what I wanted to mention in terms of content, that's all I have prepared for you today. There is a working session on December 2nd from 9:30 to 11 where you can bring your stuff and set aside time to start to think, how do I want to put this together? And what is the story that I want to tell? How do I want to use, what evidence? Um, it will be largely just a time for you to work and share a little bit with peers and get some input and some ideas. So that session you are welcome to come to and register for. And I will be repeating that session in the spring of 2026 with an online and an in-person version in case this doesn't work, because I know that's a terrible time of term for most people. But just in case it works out, you are most welcome to attend. Thank you so much for being here. I will stick around and happy to answer any questions that you want. And thank you very, very much for any feedback you offer. And thank you for being here today. And you're most welcome to contact myself or the CTLT for any support.